Hi, this is Mrs. Hamilton, and today we're going to cover cancer and how cancer relates to the cell cycle. You first need to know about checkpoints. There's a chemical control system that regulates the cell cycle, and what it means to regulate is to basically control the cell cycle or determine whether or not the cell cycle needs to go ahead with cellular division, or if for some reason the cell needs to stop cell division. A cell might stop cell division if something just isn't right. So there's a chemical control system that regulates whether or not a cell continues to divide or stops dividing. These checkpoints are located between the different phases, and we've already talked about interphase, which is G1 and then S and then G2, and we've also talked about M phase, which is of course mitosis. So if you look at the image to the left, the image is actually to the right. If you look at the image to the right, you can see these checkpoints. So for example, there's a G1 checkpoint, and at that point, that particular checkpoint is going to check for the size of the cell to make sure it's large enough, the cell has enough nutrients, the cell has enough growth factors, which basically tell the cell to continue to grow, and it's also going to check for any damage to the DNA. If for some reason there's something wrong at the G1 checkpoint, you can see that the cell will then be directed to go into a resting state called the G0 phase. Otherwise, it's going to continue into S phase. There's actually a checkpoint in S phase that you can't see on this particular image, and that particular checkpoint is going to make sure that the DNA was copied or replicated correctly. Then you have a G2 checkpoint that occurs at the end of G2 or the end of interphase. It's going to check again to make sure that the cell size is large enough and that DNA has been copied correctly. If everything looks correct, then that particular cell will go ahead and divide through mitosis, which is your prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. If things are not correct, then it'll be directed to a resting state. Okay? There's also in mitosis what's called a spindle assembly checkpoint to make sure that the chromosomes are attached to the spindle fibers like they're supposed to be. So you can see here, and there are actually several checkpoints along the way, but you can see that these checkpoints make sure that the cell is going to divide correctly. Checkpoints will either start the cell cycle or can stop the cell cycle, depending upon the situation. Now, what happens if, for some reason, the checkpoints do not catch errors in the cell during the cell cycle? If for any reason control of the cell cycle is lost, you're going to have what's called uncontrolled cellular division. So that means there is nothing controlling that cell's dividing, and that could be an issue. And again, you can see here, there are different checkpoints along the way to check to make sure that everything is appropriate. Okay, and we just talked about these. So if for some reason control of that cell cycle is lost and checkpoints are not saying stop or go, then that particular cell may enter uncontrolled growth. There's nothing controlling that particular cell's growth. At that point, cancers may arise from that cell that does not regulate its division properly. So cancer cells are cells that have the ability to ignore or override those checkpoints. And instead of allowing themselves to be controlled by those checkpoints, they just continue to divide no matter what that chemical system says. And that's where issues come in. Now, normally if a cell is abnormal and overrides a checkpoint and continues uncontrolled cellular division, your immune system will actually destroy it and take care of it. However, there are situations where the immune system does not do an effective job in destroying that particular cancer cell, and that particular cell is going to continue to divide by mitosis and make more cancer cells just like it. And that's where the source of cancer comes from. Those particular cells override the checkpoints and basically do their own thing. They're not kept in check by those checkpoints. Now what happens? Well, you may or may not see a tumor. A tumor results from those abnormal cancer cells that continue to divide uncontrollably through mitosis. They're just doing their own thing, and they're just dividing and dividing and dividing and dividing and not paying attention to what the checkpoints are trying to make them do, which is stop dividing. And you can see in the image over here that a tumor is forming. Those are all those cancer cells that are dividing. And if you've done page 76, you've also seen some cancerous cells under the microscope where you've had to count them in their particular phases. But you can start to see that those cancer cells start to build up on themselves, and they create what is called a tumor. Tumors can either be benign or they can be malignant based on the characteristics that they display. Now, benign tumors are basically, you don't want to call them a good tumor, but they're going to be tumors that do not cause a lot of damage. They stay at the site where the first abnormal cell appeared, so they don't travel through the body. They stay where they began. They do not spread. And typically they can be removed by surgery if caught early enough. And you can see there in the picture that they just basically form their tumor, stay where they originated, and they can usually be removed by surgery, but of course not always. Okay? Compare that to the malignant cancer, and you can see here where the malignant cancer spreads. It goes into neighboring tissues, it goes into the bloodstream and also your lymph system, and metastasizes or travels to different sites. So to finish up, malignant tumors, they spread to other areas other than the first site. They can affect other tissues, they can affect other organs, they can also affect whole organ systems. They metastasize or they break off from the original tumor, and they travel to other parts of the organism and cause other tumors to form. Malignant tumors can be treated with radiation. They can be treated with surgery, chemotherapy, or any combination of those. Sometimes those treatments are successful, and sometimes, unfortunately, they are not. And so you can see over here in the diagram that benign or non-cancerous tumor cells, they grow locally, they stay in one spot, and they don't metastasize. On the other hand, you have malignant tumors where cells will travel from the original site and invade neighboring tissues. Well, that's all I have for you. I was not going to include any real-life pictures of tumors. I looked at some, and you might want to look up the word tumor by yourself, but those pictures are not very pretty. All right, so next you will show me your notes, get credit for taking notes, and then you will watch a video on the cell cycle and cancer. All right, thanks a lot. Have a great day.